Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. A real pleasure today to be joined by Ben Martin. Ben works an awful lot with leaders, business leaders in particular. So let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about your own journey and the work that you're involved in. So over to you, Ben.
So, firstly, Simon, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to the audience today. I am a health and fitness coach. I have been working now in the health and fitness space for the last 8 years of my life, and these days focus my time working with business leaders, entrepreneurs, business founders, and so on. Main reasons being that the stressful, demanding nature of a high performance life within business, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners, a lot of previous guests, and maybe even potentially yourself understand first and foremost how difficult it can be to take care of health, manage stress, diet, and so on. So for me, as a health and fitness coach, more often than not, my client base as it stands right now are particularly the most demanding and the most difficult sort of niche as far as an audience is concerned to work with, because they pose various challenges in and around where they're working, how often they're working, and travel logistics and so on. So that's me. That's in a quick nutshell what I do these days and who I work
Thank,
with.
yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks for explaining that. And let's get into it then, because I personally have traveled around the world for business. I've been that person who, to others, it looks glamorous. It looks fantastic. You're making
Sure.
lots of money. You're flying around. Your company's got a corporate jet. You're in various countries. The reality is, you don't sleep great. You eat terrible. You're under constant pressure. You go from hotel to air conditioned ground transportation to boardroom. You're pretty much dark to dark at each ends, and your workload is extreme. So I know you talk about this, and the reason why I bring this up is because you talk about the fact that most people don't see that, because we all see this stylized view, don't we, from the internet,
Completely.
from social media. And then you use the term, which I really like, that people are often under huge stress and they're dancing between time zones, or they're connecting like this in like an online environment. Could you maybe unpack that a bit more, and how that feeds into this real need for proper sleep, proper health, proper exercise, and the way that leaders need to focus today? Because the world's speeding up. It's certainly not getting any slower anyway.
Absolutely. Where travel's concerned, it poses a lot of logistical nightmares when you're looking at your diet. Obviously, if you're dancing around time zones, then your sleep quality, your sleep routine and rhythm gets thrown out of the window. Exercising becomes very difficult when you can be jumping on a plane across time zones, and then you're trying to manage where you're able to do any exercise. If you're going straight into board meetings, if you're just jumping into a hotel, it's 1 2 a.m. and so on. So there's, I think, in essence, from a health and fitness standpoint, what you always want to try to establish as best as possible is regulation. So you want a regulated sleep pattern, you want a regulated diet where possible, you want a regulated exercise routine. Our bodies innately love routine, whether that's the food we're intaking, when we go into sleep, when and how often we're exercising, and so on. So the nature of all of those logistics combined means that it is logistically a nightmare. So that can have a huge impact then on these business leaders when they're trying to perform in work. So I think a good analogy to try and use would be, if you were to get an elite sort of sporting athlete, if they were to be competing in North America and they were UK based next week, they would be flown out as quickly as possible to acclimatize and establish a routine so that they could perform at their best whilst they're there. They would be taking care of sleep as quickly as possible. They would be eating the right things so they're able to perform next week. Business leaders can sometimes be walking into huge meetings, making really, really important decisions, both for their business, maybe consulting clients and so on, that are going to really transform the next however many months further down the line. If you're going into those situations and you've got a massive amount of brain fog, you've not slept right, you're not hydrated because you're bouncing from coffee to coffee, and you've maybe not exercised for 2 or 3 weeks, you're somewhat away from feeling at your best. So then to try and demand yourself and others within those spaces to be making the best decisions possible for themselves, for the business, for clients, and so on and so forth, is setting yourself up for an uphill battle essentially.
Yeah, really important points that you mentioned, Ben. And like, you start with the brain fog and the maybe that cognitive decline almost. But it can lead on to, for many leaders who are bouncing around these time zones. They're probably in a high pressure environment most of their waking hours. They're probably not sleeping great. Um, some people get on top of it. Some people need some help or some structure to do that, because it can lead to disease and stroke and worse things, mental health and well-being being, sort of more on the table today. At least it's a discussion within companies. At least executives are paying more focus to it. So how important is it for a leader to get maybe a tailored approach to this, as opposed to a, inverted commas, one size fits all? Where does the tailoring come in? Because everybody's different, right? Everybody's got a different schedule. Everybody's job's different. Everybody reacts differently. Some people are on top of some things. Some people are underwater on other things. Where do you come in? Where does the CEO Health Hub kick in? And what's the approach that you take to work with business leaders?
So I guess there's loads of avenues you can take in health and fitness. There are training apps you can subscribe to. You can jump and find out various bits through YouTube and Google and so on and so forth. A lot of those are very generic, like I say, one size fits all. Business leaders, so whether that's running a big team, being the primary decision maker, whether it's traveling nationally, internationally, and what have you. We've touched on a few logistical problems, but also time is a massive problem more often than not. In that there's a real need for more time, and more often than not. So a lot of typical generic training programs that you could get hold of that would take you down to the gym. People will be talking about exercising for 60 to 90 minutes. A lot of my clients, for instance, we will program sessions that can last between 25 and 30 minutes, because it might be a case of fitting something in a home gym, fitting something in a hotel gym prior to meetings, and so on and so forth. So it's all about tailoring it to the individual and what they're able to do, what their schedule allows, so that they're able to maintain and be at their best. Because what we want to create more than anything is that consistency element. So sometimes in the short term, people may want to commit to more. What I will always say to them is, what we're going to build right now is the building blocks of what I want you to be doing in 6, 12, 18 months time, so that you're able to be consistent and these things are able to stick and become a part of your routine. And then it's tailoring the approach in and around their nutrition. Some people I work with are entirely sort of working as we're working now across Zoom, and they're based at home. Their diet situation is vastly different to someone who is quite literally on the road or in a plane day to day. So it's all about shaping it. And I always say our program comes to the client. We're not sort of a built program that's designed to try and fit everybody's needs. We come to the client and everything's built from scratch based on their current situation and what their life is demanding of us, really.
And tell me, I mean, that's very interesting. And obviously, um, we've come through a pandemic. People had to get used to doing things online more. How important is it today that you have an online coach as well as maybe an offline coach? How does that balance work when you're working with business leaders? I'm assuming it's essential in today's busy world.
100%. And if you think a lot of these things come back to time, inherently with who I work with. If you were to try and squeeze in multiple, say, for example, personal training sessions per week into a lot of my clients and a lot of my audience's calendars, that's a logistical nightmare. It would probably cause way more stress than it would cause any good for them, really. And in effect, what you'll find is it becomes a massive inconsistency. So it just becomes an extra frustration in their life that maybe they can get some of those things done, but then you're trying to then link up with someone in person. So it's not just their schedule that has to perfectly align with their trainer's schedule, for example. Whereas what we do is provide all of our services remotely, programming wise, as far as how we program exercising, they can be built into their schedules, and I don't have to influence that in any way, shape, or form. They only have to meet their own schedules with that. I coach and guide them through all of those bits and pieces. And then, of course, if they're in the UK, if they're in Ireland, if they're in the States, if they're in Dubai, we can jump on a call at any point, really, to discuss anything that they need.
Does accountability play a part in it? Because I'm conscious today, we've all got smart devices, smart watches, we've got sensors that track everything from, what we're eating to how many hours we're sleeping to how many steps we've done to what our heart rate is pulsing at. So we've kind of got this modern smart health tech going on around us. But what about just that activity of checking in with somebody and knowing that that's there? Is accountability a big thing in your world?
I'd say accountability is possibly. I would say outside of the actual plan itself and the framework that we give our guys, I'd say accountability is the next biggest sort of selling point for what we do. I think for anyone in your audience that can be listening to this, if you think how many times you make yourself a promise, and it could be the smallest thing in the world, like, oh, I'm going to make sure that I read a couple of pages of that book that I've been telling myself I'm going to read for the last month this evening when I finish and put the laptop down, or it may be get out for a walk with family at the weekend, whatever it is, and how many times the excuses can be made and those things can be pushed to one side because when you're accountable to yourself, there isn't really a repercussion that exists. So we're all very, very good at creating excuses in our own mind to just let things slip. Exercise, what you're eating, how well you're looking after your sleep, your hydration, and so on. They are not outside of that in any way, shape, or form. Whereas when I'm holding my clients accountable to what they should be doing, there's that extra element of peer pressure, and we'll never let someone else down as easily as we let ourselves down, is what I would say. And I would say that's the biggest sort of transformational factor about having a coach in your corner, is you've got somebody to not only support you but keep you accountable to your word. And I'm there for my clients' best interest. So when they highlight that they're feeling a certain way, and that's why we need to make certain changes happen, I will draw on how they're feeling and say, listen, if we continue to not do these things, we can stay in this place that you know you're unhappy with. So I'm their coach and the support sort of system, but I also will keep them accountable and keep them in line with what is ultimately for their best interests.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, you work with chief executive officers, you're working with executives from companies, you're also working with business owners. And quite often, the health side of things for many people can get put on the back burner. It can get left because business is going well, you're busy. Business is going bad, you're definitely busy and focused.
Yeah.
So how do you work with them to bring that health, that energy, that sort of agenda forward? Because in a lot of cases, I'm imagining a lot of your clients, it's not that they don't want to do it. It's not that they're not intelligent, smart people. It's maybe finding the time or making that a priority over everything else they're dealing with in their life. And that sounds easy to say, but I know it's a challenge for many business owners or business leaders. How do you begin that discussion with them?
So the first thing that I try to do is highlight the benefits of getting these things right, because I think health and fitness can quite easily, it's easy to slip into a trap with health and fitness and thinking that it's just getting a little bit fitter, eating a few more vegetables, and potentially losing a little bit of weight. And that's quite often all that people attribute it to. Whereas if you get your diet right, if you're consistently exercising, you can regulate your sleep, you're drinking water more than anything else, you will start to feel like a different person, which then ripples through every aspect of your life. So that means you're making clearer decisions at work. You're more energetic for your team. You're probably going to be more patient for your team because it's a massive, massive contributing factor to dropping stress, which is inherently a big, big part of being a business leader. So in the workplace, it will be transformational in that you'll just show up and be a better leader, be a better decision maker, and your strategy and all that sort of jazz that comes along with it will all improve. But not only that, it will then better your personal life. So how you're showing up in relationship, potentially marriages, if you've got children, how you are as a parent, and so on. So I just think it's really, really important to highlight that this isn't just getting a bit fitter and eating a few more vegetables. It's a lot more than that. It's quite literally transforming how you're showing up as a person, which, business leaders, could be a dad at home and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different hats to wear, and it's how well do you want to be showing up within those roles. And I think it's important to highlight that first and foremost. And then what I would add to that is that due to the stressful nature of these guys that I work with and their lives, there's a big old priority list. And more often than not, there's an urgent list at work, there's an important list, and then there's a whole load of other stuff as well that can get added to that. And then there is also, more often than not, with people I work with, family lives as well, which are already then thrown into that. And quite often they do find themselves at the bottom of the list. When they invest in getting help through a coach, in this instance myself, I'm helping to bump health up that priority ladder for them. And more often than not, I'm almost taking care of the headspace element for them. So they're not necessarily having to attribute too much headspace too much of their emotional energy to this because they've got me to take care of that for them, if that makes sense. So I think the first way to tackle it is to go beyond the surface and really unlock and create that understanding of what this can actually impact in their lives. But secondly, on the day-to-day practical side of things, I totally understand that this can't always be top of the priority list, and rarely would that be the case with all they have on their plate. Therefore, I'm taking care of that aspect for them.
Yeah, I'm thinking as you're talking about how some of the world's most successful business leaders even get down to the point of only wearing the same uniform, if you like, in inverted commas, so they have less decisions to make. That could be world leaders and politicians or extremely successful CEOs leading some of the world's biggest companies. They have a particular style, not because they want a particular style, but because it's easier than having to decide what they wear every day. And that might sound
Sure.
trivial, but their constant waking hours is making decisions. And also, the other thing that you said that made me really think was how they come last. The individual comes almost last on that long list of priorities. So, with your help, they can move that up. You may not get to the top, but you're
Yeah.
moving it back on the radar, and they know they have that support structure around it. And to that end, my question is really around this. Although you made the point about health and fitness and diet and sleep, but it's as much as a mental part to this, isn't it? As well as the physical or the diet that you're eating or the sleep that you're getting. Because I'm imagining with these leaders, if you can't reach them at a sort of, mental level, it's very hard for them to kick into the physical side of it. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, totally. And I think for me personally, and it's funny, I had a conversation very much along these lines a couple of hours ago with sort of a peer within my industry. I am very, very thankful that health is very much at the forefront of people's minds these days. I'm very, very thankful that mental health is being more progressively spoken about. But what I want to get away from really, and what I'd love things to get away from, is what I've just said there is mental health and physical health. We need to just start discussing our bodies as one. Health is health, and the mind and the body operate as one. And there's a clear and distinct correlation between getting your physical health in the correct position and your mind being in a better place for it. So mental health, just it cannot be argued anymore. There's been so many studies done on it. If you get your physical health in order, your mind will benefit. But we need to start discussing, in my view, health as one picture. Mental health, physical health, it needs to be wrapped up and taken seriously as one thing, because that's ultimately what it is. I'm not sure at what stage someone drew a line at the neck and cut the head off, as it were, and sort of started using our body as if it's in two different sections. From what I can see in the world, it's a joined up body. So I think we need to start discussing health as one thing really, and trying not to distinguish the two, because I think there's a lot more correlation going on there than people really give it credit for.
I really like that. It's so simple, but it's so true. And I really like the way you've positioned that. And before we move on to something else, I want to ask you, obviously you're working with people. Now they could be in the Middle East, they could be in the USA, they could be in Europe, they could be in the UK, wherever they are on the planet, you're working with this cross section of business leaders. Do you find there are commonalities, Ben? Are people pretty much struggling with the same four things? Or is it much more wide and varied than that? And I'm asking that question really for people watching or listening to this who may be struggling with some aspect of their health and fitness and mental side of, this whole body approach that you've described there. Are there common factors here that you can easily address, or is it that we've really got to work this out at an individual level?
There are definitely common factors, definitely, and no matter where you are in the world, and no matter what role you're in, what industry you're in, more often than not, a lot of the things that people I work with, a lot of struggles come down to lack of available time, travel and logistics being another huge one. And then I would say the sort of third one in there that's very, very common would be that stress element, overload, lack of mental headspace, and so on. So there are three hugely sort of common factors that you'll get across the board. When I'm speaking to any client, or any potential client, I'm trying to gather how much time they've got available, how much experience they've got, where they're currently at as far as if they're exercising at all, how much they're able to do, where their current nutritional sort of plan, if they've got one at all, is sat. So there's massively common factors across the board. I would just say that the sort of business leader element of it that I work with is the nuance, but I would say it would be 1 in every 50 people that I see that it's a very, very, very complex case. For the most part, it's quite common issues, sort of client to client, and it's a real funny one, because every single time I get on a call with a new prospective client, they'll say, "I'm not sure you've ever heard this before, but," and I said, "Well, actually, do you know what? That situation is very, very common. I heard the same thing yesterday from another guy, different context, but it's the same issue for me to solve." So I'm just looking at sort of 4 key areas, and the 4 key pillars that we highlight as far as sort of simplifying our approach for our clients is looking at their movement, which is day-to-day activity, training, exercise, their nutrition, what they're putting in their body, wrap hydration into that, their mindset, how they're mentally approaching all of those bits and pieces, and then just the softer stuff, so day-to-day habits, the small bits and pieces. Are we waking up at the same time each day, and all that sort of jazz? So they're the 4 real simplified pillars that we use with our guys.
Well, that's great. And thanks for sharing those 4 pillars. I'm sure a lot of what you said there is landing with people watching or listening to us today. So let's move it on a little bit. Let's talk a bit more about the future now. With CEO Health Hub, with all this great work that you're doing, how do you go about planning what you do? Obviously, you need to attract new clients. Obviously, you're looking after and servicing the existing people that work with you. But if you look forward and you think about the next 6, 12, 18 months, is that how you approach things? What does your roadmap look like? How do you go about planning in your world, Ben?
So as far as what we're doing right now, continue exactly what we're doing, building up our client base, and ultimately branching out and helping as many business leaders as we possibly can. I think I got into the coaching industry because I sort of very much enjoy helping someone go through a journey of massively progressing where they're at personally. And it's even more rewarding doing that with someone who's achieved an enormous amount of sex just in a different facet of their life. So for me, it's to continue doing what we're doing, and ultimately build out a bit of a bigger team so that we can help more individuals. And then I would say in the next 18 months or so, I'd actually love to move towards a little bit more of a group-based service. So going into businesses and dealing with the leadership team as a whole, and driving a little bit more of a community competitive environment in and around health and fitness. And business leaders, by their very nature, very competitive people. So that's something that I'm seeing more and more of. And I think the whole move through the pandemic led everybody to be very independent. The Zoom scenario, the remote scenario, became a world that we all became very, very used to. Everybody got used to working one-on-one in my space with what I'm doing. I think as we're drifting out of that now, and we have been for some time, I think people are craving community more than ever. So I think in the next 18 months, getting the individual service in a better space where I can gain a little bit of time back and put some focus into a bit more of a group-based dynamic is where I see my future going.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. And look, finally, is there anything else that maybe we haven't touched on, or maybe an element that we have that you'd like to expand on that you could leave with our audience today? And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to connect with you, Ben, and find out more about, this work that you're doing with CEOs and business leaders, where's the best place to point people to?
Sure. So what I would say is, outside of the obvious, so lack of available time, too stressed, maybe just not on your radar right now, a massively contributing factor to a lot of people not taking action as far as trying to improve their current health and fitness is they don't believe that they're able to do it. Especially people that have got an awful lot on their plate. Belief and lack of belief are massively contributing factors to people doing nothing and staying where they're standing right now. And what I would say is, I've worked with an awful lot of people in extremely demanding, extremely tricky situations where, for the naked eye, a lot of people would assume that there's nothing that can be done right now, but we've achieved an awful lot. So take some belief from that and almost remove the ego from the situation somewhat, in that despite it might feel tricky and impossible, there's been plenty of people that have done it in that similar sort of scenario, and plenty of people with a lot more on their plate that have done it as well. And just give yourself a little bit of belief, because you need that belief in order to start moving forwards with it. I think that's the first thing that needs to come before actually addressing the practicalities. And then I guess if anybody wants to discuss any of these things in any more depth, then they can find me on my LinkedIn profile. Just search Ben Martin or CEO Health Hub and you'll find everything there. And what we what I always offer, what we always offer anybody who's got an interest or discussing things a little bit more, is a free health audit call. So you book in for 15, 20 minutes, nothing too crazy. Discuss where you're currently at. We can discuss where you'd like to move to aspirationally. I can help to plug the gap through some of our client resources and practical steps you could look to follow and so on. And there's no strings attached within that call. There's literally nothing that can be brought on that call. It's just quite simply an opportunity to provide people with as much value as you can do, and hopefully take some golden nuggets away and make some positive changes.
All great advice, and a great opportunity for people to reach out for that audit call and to find out more. So thanks for sharing that, Ben. It brings us nicely to the end of our discussion here today on the global discussion. I want to thank everybody who's watched or listened to this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support this show. Of course, go and check out CEO Health Hub and all the great work that Ben Martin is doing. You can catch up with him on LinkedIn, as he mentioned too. And I hope you join me back here for some more conversations with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Ben. So thanks, Ben. It's been wonderful to talk to you again today.
Thank you very much, Simon. Appreciate your time.